Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm Amrith Ramkumar. I graduated from Duke in 2017, and on behalf of the Chronicle, Duke NY, and Demon, welcome to tonight's discussion. Should be really exciting about Devin Gordon's new book, So Many Ways to Lose, about his lifetime being a misfortunate Mets fan. I have a feeling many of you on the call share these sentiments, but I'm hosting tonight's event, and yeah, we're really excited as a bunch of Chronicle alums. It's always great when people in the Duke media industry can reconnect and get together for things like this. We've done several virtual events, and collaborations like this are awesome. And we really hope that all of you continue supporting the Chronicle students and all of Duke's journalism students and everyone any way you can. So please sign up for our newsletters, like donate if you're in a position to do so, read the content, tell the students what you want covered. We all know this is a transformational period at Duke and there's so much going on. And we're really glad again to see so many of you tonight. I was editor-in-chief of the Chronicle. Now it feels like forever ago before I graduated. Now I work for the Wall Street Journal in New York. So yeah, we're really excited about everything that's going on. And now we'll kick it over to Chrissy Beck, our general manager, to talk a little bit more about the event.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. As Amra said, I am the general manager here at the Chronicle, and I am just finishing up my 12th year here. So I see a lot of familiar names here. Thank you for coming tonight. I just have a few housekeeping items. The first thing is there is a chat, and if you have any questions or problems, you can just drop a message there and somebody will help you. The second thing is you will have questions that you'll want to ask Devin, and please do just drop them in the chat. Towards the end of the event, about 7:45, we will start pulling those questions and we will get them to Devin via Emma. So please start putting questions in as you think of them, and we'll take care of that. We're also recording this event tonight to share with alumni that couldn't make it, and you'll be able to find it later on Demons Live, and we're going to drop a link in there for you so you know where to find it if you want to share it with a friend that couldn't make it. And one other really fun thing is that we're going to give away 5 books that, obviously Devin's book at the end of the evening. So I am going to draw names at random from the attendee list, and I will let you guys know at the very end if you are having a book delivered to your home. So all fun stuff, and thank you, but let's get started. Amrith, you want to introduce Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. So leading tonight's discussion is Emma Baccellieri. Emma was managing editor of the Chronicle and graduated in 2016 and now does an amazing job covering Major League Baseball for Sports Illustrated. She's based in DC and her work has been featured in a lot of baseball publications. So I was at school with Emma and knew she was a giant baseball nerd, but my favorite fun fact about her is she only covered 1 Duke baseball game, but is now a really awesome baseball reporter professionally. So a lot of fun stuff to get into there. And she'll of course be talking with Devin Gordon. Devin was born and raised in New York. Those of you who have looked into his book can probably figure that out now. He was editor-in-chief of the Chronicle and he graduated from Duke in 1998. He is now a contributing writer for the New York Times, GQ, and ESPN the magazine. He worked at GQ for several years, and he was executive editor until early 2018. And he now actually lives in Boston, outside of Boston, with his wife, who also went to Duke, and their 2 kids. So a lot to unpack there as well. So yeah, now I'll shut up and kick it over to Emma to take it from here.
Thank you, Amrith, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I'd originally planned on saying thank you for choosing us over a Jacob deGrom start. However, as I'm sure many of you saw, Jacob deGrom was scratched about an hour ago. So thank you for choosing us over a Mets bullpen game instead. So I think to start, we're going to go with some rapid fire questions, Devin. Just dive right in, some either or things. So let's jump in with Shea Stadium or Citi Field.
God, well, okay, hang on. While I think about it, I gotta say, I'm gonna think about it and delay by saying thank you, Emma. I've been a big fan of your writing and a Twitter follower for a long time. You helped me be like my periscope to the rest of America and the rest of the baseball teams. And thanks to Duke, thanks to the Chronicle, thanks to Demon, thanks to all of you. I see some very familiar faces and very familiar names. I see someone named Grayson out there, which I can only assume is Grayson Allen. So I guess the Grizzlies aren't playing tonight. Thank you for tuning in, Grayson Allen. I'm just going to assume it's Grayson. Shea Stadium. I'm going to go with Shea Stadium because it's just more the spirit of the Mets. City is a really, really fun ballpark to watch a game in, but it feels like it could be anybody's fun ballpark to watch a game in. Specifically the Brooklyn Dodgers. I think they would rather they're playing there. Shea is ours. Shea is the Metsiest ballpark we've played in. So I'm okay, Shea.
Well, next one is maybe a trickier one. 1986 World Series or 2001 Duke National Championship?
86.
Okay.
86, because I was gone from Duke by 2001. So that may have something to do with it. If I was there when it happened, that might have been a little bit tougher. And I loved the hell out of the 2001 title, don't get me wrong. But 86, yeah.
All right, well, let's go back into the actual questions about the book, which
Yes.
I have here.
Okay.
It's clear from this that you're a lifelong fan, that you're really passionate about the Mets. What made you want to channel that into the act and the labor of writing a book about the franchise and everything that's gone on around it, not as a fan, but as a reporter?
It wasn't something I ever aspired to do. I spent 20 years in magazines for a reason. I've always, as you probably know, like if you've been a writer long enough and you're a journalist, you get asked if you want to write a book about something. It's just a thing you get asked. And I've always said, no, books are really long. I work in magazines for a reason. And this began as a magazine article. This began as an article in the New York Times Magazine about the Mets announcers, Gary, Keith, and Ron, the best announcers there is in baseball. Most people agree, or at least put them in the top three. They're the one thing that we have that's great, always. And that's where the article began. And after it came out and people read it, I got asked about writing a book. And as I talked to people more, they were like, what they were really asking was if I wanted to write a book about the Mets. And I turned sort of the subtext of the book, which was this gift that the Mets seem to have for spectacular losing, not necessarily being bad, spectacular losing, that our wonderful, stricken announcers have to call, right? They have to suffer through this. It's their Groundhog Day even more than ours. But you can't write a book about Gary, Keith, and Ron necessarily. So it was really the subtext of the article that became the text of the book. And what if you just look at the whole history of the Mets and answer the question, why are we like this? I guess that's really where the book became, like how it transitioned from an article to a book is me sort of looking at myself and being like, how did I get like this? Why am I like this? And, which is the question all of us eventually ask ourselves at some point, just we don't write a book about it. And it's usually not an answer that leads you to the Mets. And it was the same way with the Mets. Why are the Mets like this? Is it faded? Is it in the DNA? Can we ever get rid of it? And so that means going back and looking at the history from the start. Yeah, it's in the DNA. We can't we will not ever get rid of it. That's the answer. That's basically the conclusion of the book.
And what are the challenges of writing a book about something that is so close to you and that I would imagine you think you have an idea of this, you've been watching it for decades and now you're approaching it from such a different lens?
Well, that's the fun part of being a journalist coming into this and a researcher and someone who's trying to look at history through a more modern lens and perhaps a slightly different, omniscient view than is usually brought to sports journalism and sports history. And one of the things that I've come to know about writing about sports, which is how I tend to have the most fun writing, is the fan experience is subjective. The experience of sports is subjective. It's really, really hard to remove the fandom, the emotion, the investment from the objective experience of the event itself. It becomes something different no matter who's watching it. And so to me, writing a history of the Mets that actually gets at the identity of the Mets, that people would read and say, that's my team, I recognize that. it has to be subjective. And that's not biased. There's a difference between biased and subjective. It has to be from the vantage point of a Mets fan, I think, for it to feel authentic to the Mets. But I don't think it's biased, or at least I hope not. It's definitely subjective. It's totally subjective. Like the angst and anger and outright rudeness, frankly, toward the Yankees in my book is extreme and unacceptable, but it's subjective, so I can do what I want.
And going into that is subjectivity, you know, I obviously have to write about a lot of losing, embarrassing moments, frustration, the Mets, but it's clearly done with love. And I think that balance is very familiar to any Mets fan. How do you go about navigating that dynamic of writing about, you know, sometimes not necessarily bad baseball, but just absurd baseball? But with keeping that perspective.
You know, I keep, one of the things that I've found over talking about this and thinking about this for such a long time is that distilling the Mets has, for me, come down to the difference between being bad and being gifted at losing. And the Mets are gifted at losing. They are not bad. And that's a huge distinction. And it seems like they'd be the same thing, but bad is the Detroit Lions. Right? They just do nothing but lose. They don't do it memorably. They don't do it colorfully. They don't have ups and downs. They just lose. And anybody can lose. We're all losers. Everybody here, I'm sorry, everybody, all 100 or whatever of you on this Zoom, we're all losers during the course of our day. We lose most of the things we do. 29 out of 30 teams lose at the end of the season. And that's not special. That's just being bad. What the Mets do when the Mets are gifted at losing, that means they walk in the game-winning run in the 10th inning in Game 6 of the NLCS that they've fought their way back into so dramatically, only to blow it in cartoonish fashion, right? 7 years later, their best player strikes out on 3 pitches with the tying run on second base after a historic game-saving, franchise-altering defensive catch that gets erased from the history books because he didn't swing. And then 13 years later, we hired that guy to be our manager for 6 weeks, and he turns out to have engineered the greatest cheating scandal in baseball since the Chicago Black Sox of 1919. That's a Metsy way to lose. Other teams just lose. Game over, go home. That's us. And to me, that's a special thing to explore. It makes us an unusual fan base. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. It really does.
Did anything in your research surprise you?
Tons. I mean, I knew surface stories, but like the biggest example is right at the beginning, which is Mrs. Payson, who's the founding owner of the Mets, who is a name that I'd heard just by being a Mets fan. You hear Mrs. Payson's name. I never really knew anything about her except her name was Mrs. Payson, and she's the one who started the Mets. She was the first owner of the Mets. That's it. And if you're a Mets fan, that's probably the extent of what you know, and maybe even more than you know. And it's, as soon as I dove into the history a little bit more, it's just astonishing. I mean, first of all, the fact that a woman was the founding owner of the New York Mets, making her the first founding owner of a professional sports franchise in American history. Pretty impressive, and probably something that should make her a civil rights icon and a sports icon of the 20th century. And she's barely exists in Mets history. She certainly doesn't exist at Citi Field. And on top of that, she's awesome. Like, she was just an awesome person. Like, sounds like super fun. Like, she liked going to comedy clubs, and she loved horse racing and boxing, and she loved hanging out with people. And she was also a society figure, and who knew everyone. And her family basically built America, like basically just built America, and then gave her all the money. And she used it to buy the Mets and make the Mets. And she did it because she loved baseball so much that when the New York Giants broke her heart and moved to San Francisco and took Willie Mays with them, she wanted baseball back. And that's an amazing story. I think she should be famous, but it is just like the Mets to not only, like, it's one thing to like not embrace it when something's so good like that, and you can have such a good story, but to bury it is, and also just not to get off on too far a tangent, but like for the pettiest of reasons, not First of all, sexism. Number one, if you're looking at the pie chart, it's 90% sexism. The other 10% is the dumbest thing in the world, which is that the Mets are formed by two teams, right? The departure of the Giants and the Dodgers. Fred Willpons buys the team from the Payson family, and he's a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and he even built their stadium again with Citi Field. And one of the reasons why Mrs. Payson has been erased is the simple fact that she was a Giants fan. Mets fans hardly ever really talk about the Giants lineage of the team. It's all about the Dodgers. Well, there's a reason for that. And Mrs. Payson, one thing I would love for Mr. Cohen to do with the team is to sort of fix that a little bit. And so just as an example, that's a long-winded example, but there are things like that all over the place. Every Mets story that you think you know, it turns out there's like 4 turns of the screw that are even crazier.
Well, pettiness from the Willpons family is obviously unheard of.
I mean, who would have thought?
But you mentioned Steve Cohen, and speaking of him and this ownership change, this strikes me as a really interesting time to write a book about the Mets or to have a conversation about their history as a franchise, just because I think you could make a case that this is a transition into a new era of Metziness, maybe not abandoning this core DNA of the franchise. I'm not sure if there's any ownership change that can shake that core energy, but certainly a different way of operating.
Yes.
What was it like to be working on this book and now promoting it in a very different time for the franchise?
Well, there was also, not to be too obvious about it, but there were two seismic things. There was the seismic change going on within the Mets, and then there was also the pandemic, right? So, happening at the same time. And so, they were sort of working in tandem to make it clear that rather neatly, for one reason or another, the book was going to be about some kind of era of the Mets that was now over, right? And that era might have felt clear to Mets fans, if you're going from Willpons to Steve Cohen over the course of this book. And it would have been a seismic difference for Mets fans. But now it's like that chasm is so much deeper now. It's like it really, to the point where it literally is the ending of the book, right? Like the as I was writing the book, the last chunk of the book, I sort of rearranged. I was like rewriting the chapter titles, and the final part of the book is called End Times, because that's what it's felt like watching the Mets over the last 4 years and kind of living in this world. And a little bit, it just felt like everything was just going crazy, just completely crazy. And the Mets were reflecting that. The whole Steve Cohen sale. You remember there's been 2 Steve Cohen sales, right? I had to write it, rewrite it after the sale fell through, and then write it again when it actually went through and he actually bought the team. So, it naturally felt like this was just going to be a different world that the book would be read in, and that would automatically sort of give some distance to even the things that were happening so recently. If Mets fans already care about this stuff, Brody Van Wagenen, who, that, remember him? That was like a century ago, right? Like it helped in that regard. That one of the things I was worried about was that the end of the book was going to feel so near to the present day that part almost wouldn't even feel like history. And problem solved there. I mean, that's, it's, the book basically ends with 2020 hanging over us, looming in the distance like a giant thundercloud.
And from a practical standpoint, what was it like to work on this during a pandemic?
Well, the book was mostly, I finished writing the book, writing way too long a book. I'd never written a book before, and I did it all wrong, literally all wrong. I did everything wrong. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I literally did everything wrong. I would never, ever do it again, including I just wrote far more than I had any intention or expectation of writing. And I finished it, I think it was March 2nd or 3rd. So last year of 2020. And I planned a trip to New York because we were living in Boston already, to go see friends and see my agent. And it's going to be we're going to celebrate because I finished the draft of the book. And I remember the sort of, I got sick that week. I will always wonder if it was COVID. I will never know. Might well have been. And the only friends we saw was, a friend of ours who's a geneticist, who was basically explaining to us what we all now know was about to happen. He was like, kiss your summer goodbye. We're all going to be inside in a week. This is over. And I was like, I just came outside. What are you talking about? I literally was like, I was telling people, it was like I was the groundhog on Groundhog Day, and I'd come out after winter. And instead of like being like, yay, everybody was like, you'll die out here. Go back in the ground. Get out of here. Go away. It's terrible. And so that's what I did. And now here we are. But it delayed, by the way, I should have said the big thing is it delayed the book. That's the important thing. The book was supposed to come out last August, and it became immediately obvious that was just not going to work, which was a reality that I avoided until it was really, really, really obvious. And everybody who I knew was writing books said, you definitely do not want your book coming out in this moment. And then we moved it to mid-March, which I actually think was a better, COVID aside, was a better date anyway, because it's right in the middle of spring training and we were kicking off the season, and it worked, I think.
And to zoom back out a little on that writing process and what brought you here, as Amrit said, you were at GQ for a long time. You've written for outlets like the New York Times. How did your time at Duke prepare you for your career in writing and for a project like this?
Well, the Chronicle did. The Chronicle did. I spent the vast majority of my college career at 301 Flowers, I would say. I don't really think that's a particular exaggeration. I spent 2 summers there. So from, let's see, the summer of before my junior year until I graduated, I basically didn't leave the Chronicle for 2 years. I was definitely at the Chronicle more than I was in school. And I majored in English, and I'm very proud of that degree, as unlucrative as it is. But I majored at the Chronicle, right? I think a lot of people who spend all their time at Duke working at that place feel that way, as your degree is in the Chronicle, and you come out as prepared as you can be. It seems like, you and I had slightly similar trajectories at the newspaper, because I did not work in the sports department at all. I never wrote about a baseball game. There was one time I photographed a Duke basketball game at West Point against Army, because Coach K always played there, because he went to, and I'm from across the river. And no one else was like, I don't want to go to the West Point. We're going to kill these people by 50. I was like, I'll go. And so I photographed. That's the only Duke basketball. I was a news reporter. I was a news writer. I came up with news training, and that's sort of what I thought I was going to do, and what I did do. And it was almost like sports writing was like the side hustle, or like the thing I've done for fun. I don't know if you feel, is that kind of how you feel, like the thing you did for fun became your career?
Yeah, that is exactly what happened to me. And I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't necessarily sports writing. It was actually the culture writing that I was sort of moonlighting as a lot more. Like, I was getting this fantastic, across the board, soup to nuts lesson in journalism. Every element of it, reporting, editing, dealing with a university that on some level, with some people, were interested in the project of journalism as we were doing it, and some who were not, which is a good lesson for the world. And that was awesome for me. And then on the side, we had like a weekly culture insert that was called R&R back then. And I would write music reviews or like movie reviews and stuff like that. And then when I got an internship at Newsweek, I got placed in the culture section. Like you would get the internship, and then it was paid internship, by the way, and a really, really, really awesome internship program. Like I'm amazed at how many of the people who I know from that internship program are like crushing it all over the industry everywhere. It was like awesome. So, you know, I always get a little testy about people ripping on Newsweek and Time and sort of stuff like that. You know, like there's the magazine and then there's the people inside the institution. And it was, you know, that was sort of the route into journalism for me. That we didn't have, I mean, I know that's very different now. There's like a lot there, you know, Duke has journalism instruction and professors, and shout out the late Susan Tift, who is one of my heroes and journalism icons. But when Susan Tift was there, she was in the public policy department. I mean, maybe it still is sort of part of it, but it was almost like we kind of had to shoehorn the journalism professors in, and the practice of it was the Chronicle. So it was a great preparation. And then, you know, I got put in a culture department, and then on the weekends, because Newsweek closed on the weekends, I would get sent downstairs to the national affairs section to fact check. And so I had kind of this like dual education and professional life too. And so, but how did that happen for you? How did you go from like the news side to sports?
Kind of somewhat similar in that I was at the Chronicle all the time. As you said, I did major in history, but I felt like I majored at the Chronicle, and my actual GPA reflected that fact. And yeah, I loved sports. I was always tweeting about sports, talking about sports as I was writing news and pursuing internships in news, and kind of was lucky after tweeting about baseball enough to have an opportunity to do some online baseball writing, and then eventually ended up actually doing baseball writing.
Because that's to me, that's so fascinating about also the ways in which people for the Chronicle are finding their ways into journalism and into jobs, right? And I think that, you know, for good, for bad, for whatever, it's just like I graduated in 1998. And so getting an internship, there were sort of two routes. There was try to get an internship at a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, pray you got paid for it, like, because chances are you were not going to. Like almost certainly you weren't going to, and everybody knew the places that actually paid. So like, you know, everybody was applying for them. Or, and I would say this was probably the more frequent route, and every bit as valuable in totally different ways, was just go be a beat reporter at whatever newspaper you could, or whatever magazine you could, or, you know, try to freelance or something. That was, I guess, the third route was freelance, right? Which was a viable thing, right? You know, a thing that you could theoretically do. You know, sorry about this. My computer is just deciding to restore and backup right now. I don't know if I've disappeared.
No, you're still here.
Oh, okay. Well, I vanished for myself, but I can't see everyone. Oh, there you guys are. And, you know, sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought because my computer shut down. Tell me where we were.
No, you're fine. Just about the ways that getting into the industry has changed.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's like, you know, that has changed so completely. And I've taught a little bit at NYU. They have a journalism program there, and you're always getting asked the question, how do I get a job? How do I get a job? How do I get into this industry? And one of the things that's really changed is you can get your voice out if you have a voice and you know how to get it out. There are ways to do it, and you can get your writing and your work in front of people. And when I was starting out, that was just much, much harder to do. Like in just very, very practical ways, you kind of, you know, when people were hiring for journalism, it was like they were taking a leap. You know, even with your clips, it was like, well, who edited your clips? You know what I mean? Like, who wrote your clips? Like, it was, you can't hide like that anymore. And so in addition to some of these old paths, there's, you know, people we're like, she's really smart and awesome about baseball, and she clearly can distill thoughts in a cohesive, quick way. Like, go hire her. That's, how many, I know so many writers whose careers have begun that way. So many great writers whose careers have begun that way.
That's a much more flattering read on was tweeting way too much and absolutely needed a better way to channel that energy.
Yeah, but I mean, like that would have been what, like, blogging 10 or 15 years ago, right? Blogging way too much, and everybody be like, oh, you're in your basement just blogging. And like, well, yeah, I'm also becoming really good at being a writer and figuring out what I'm doing. Or, so I don't know what maybe there were versions of that all the time. It's easier for the good stuff to get seen, I think. Except that there's so much more bad stuff. There's just so much more bad stuff. And so that's, part of it. But, and of course it's, it's a way that new voices are getting into. I mean, that's really the big change is, the gatekeeping is so much different and so much more for so much the better. It's so much more exciting now to follow sports and read about sports.
Yeah. And speaking of Duke fandom and Mets fandom, both very passionate, but very different vibes, I guess I would say. How would you compare those two central fandoms for you?
I mean, I think I have to just cop to the core hypocrisy, right? I mean, shouldn't I just just come right out and admit that they're incompatible in some core way? They are, like, we're in a room full of friends here. We can be honest. We're the Yankees of college sports. We are, and it does us no use to pretend otherwise. I can make a case for why we are much more palatable than the Yankees. We are, for all kinds of reasons. That won't get us very far outside of this Zoom collective, right? But I can't even make the claim, by the way, that when I went to Duke for the English department, it wasn't because no, it was very much because the basketball team. Like, it was like, like the huge academics, I didn't want to go like a pretty campus, all that. I wanted a huge part of it was Grant Hill. Okay, a huge part of it was Grant Hill. So it's not like I can, I jumped on the bandwagon a little bit, I guess. I don't know what to say. I mean, I loved Grant Hill because we pulled off the big upset. That's why I like Duke. So if I'm going to defend the decision, which is indefensible, again, stipulated, it's because of Grant Hill, and because when I chose Duke was the one knocking off Goliath, right? Which is not who we are now. We're Goliath now. But I will say, and again, this has to be taken with a lot of rationalization, being a Duke fan helps me out as a baseball fan, because it helps me hate the Yankees better and understand their pathology and how to knife them really deep. I mean, like, I can really hurt Yankee fans. And one of the reasons why is because I know their weaknesses. And one of the reasons I know their weaknesses is because I went to Duke. And so, like, if you're, I feel like, you conquer your enemy by studying them or something. I don't know, something like that, whatever. But that's my defense. It's terrible. It's not defense. Like, but I don't know why. I just loved Duke basketball, I guess.
Does the perspective, does being a Mets fan give you perspective that makes you appreciate, at least in better Duke years, the relative lack of drama, strange headlines, absurdity? Is there like a level of peace that you get to enjoy there that
Yeah, I mean, like, it's nice to have the taste, right? Is that what you're saying? It's nice to have the taste of victory, to know every once in a while. But here's the thing. Here's how the Mets fan predominates and that the DNA in me is fundamentally Mets and not Duke. Okay. I brought the Mets with me to Duke. I really did. And here's how I know. From 1986, when Coach K took Duke to the Final Four for the first time, to, I believe, 2007, which covers something like 24 or 25 graduating classes of Duke. Only one of those graduating classes managed to get through their entire 4-year tenure at Duke without seeing a single Final Four. You had to pick the right 4 years to be at Duke in that quarter century to not get a Final Four. Guess who was there for those 4 years? Guess whose freshman year was the last time we missed the tournament, right? Right, this guy. So if you want to look back at the worst Duke era, I think you could make a case it's my fault. Like, I think that there's a real case to be made that all of it, I mean, I realize that that's sort of self-absorbed and narcissistic, but at the same time, if you wanted to blame it on me, fine. I mean, I don't care.
Is this your formal apology to any other class of 98ers on the call?
Sure. Look, this is another true fact, okay? I was, as you know, the editor of the newspaper that year. If any of you happen to remember what happened to Duke in the tournament in 1998, well, let me remind you, we were winning by, I believe it was 17 points. I might have that history wrong, with 9 minutes left in the second half of the Elite Eight game versus none other than the Kentucky Wildcats, who, let's just say, we had beaten in rather heartbreaking fashion 7 years earlier, okay? The game was over. We were destroying them. That team was awesome. They went to the national title game the very next year because I'd left, by the way. That's why. And I designed a front page that I will regret for the rest of my life. And the headline was Deja Blue. And then I came back to, you guys know that the Chronicle's geography is you would design the front page all the way in the back by Dr. Raleigh Miller. And then you would come all the way to the front where the lounge was and the TV was, which was where everybody was watching the game. And, when we were up by 17 and there was a TV timeout, playing with the headline. It was a Sunday afternoon. And all I remember from then on is just Wayne Turner just driving through our defense like we were traffic cones on the floor. Like literally just like we just could not move. And of course we lost. And I take I really, like literally since that day, I've taken full responsibility for that loss. But now that I reflect on it and so much history had passed, just give me the whole time. Just give me the whole era. I'll take it all.
Well, I think we have some questions in the chat, but one more before we pivot to those. How are you feeling about the Mets right now? Jacob deGrom is looking better than he ever has when he's not
Is
hurt.
He though? Yeah. Okay.
Not today. Francisco Lindor hasn't quite been where people would like him to. It's supposed to be a new era, kind of finding their footing. What's your take right now?
I'm a little bit weird as a Mets fan in one respect, which is that although I am fatalistic like any other, obviously, I'm a little bit more patient than I think most Mets fans. I sometimes even frustrate them because I'm just not willing to. Baseball is such a long marathon, weird, quirky thing that I do not believe, even for the Mets, that we have turned Francisco Lindor into Ray Ordonez overnight. That is not what happened. He'll be fine. I really, 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 truly believe he will be fine. I'm very optimistic about this season. Obviously, I think we're going to win the World Series because I always do. And one of these days I'll be right. But our defense, as you know, Emma, is horrible. Really catastrophically, terrifyingly bad, with the exception of Francisco Lindor, who's been amazing. That's the one place he's been amazing. This is probably the worst Mets defense ever. I mean, I don't know if there's any Mets historians. I mean, there's probably a couple years there, like in the 70s when things turned to sludge. But like, this is really bad and we can't fix it. We're stuck with this defense. Like this is the team, you know, when Gene Hackman and Hoosiers is like, my team is on the floor. Our team is on the floor, you know? So I don't know how you feel that way as the baseball expert, but I just look at this team. And by the way to stick the knife in by saying the 2015 Kansas City Royals, the new Royals, the 2021 Royals. I read this, I don't know if anybody knows this, but Emma's piece, I think it was today, she writes this piece going, boy, the 2021 Royals sure look a lot like the 2015 Royals. And I'm thinking, are you subtweeting me? Like, but like, what are you trying to do to me? I'm like trying to get optimistic about the season. And now here I am thinking like, we're going to finally make it through all this, get to the World Series and run into the damn Kansas City Royals again. And they're going to beat us again because she just told us they're exactly like they were in 2015. Don't you think we're going to lose because of our defense eventually?
The defense is bad. I do think the one potential saving grace here is how bad the rest of the NL East is. Just like really has been atrocious up and down so far. I don't think the Braves are going to look like this forever, but I do think that is one potential saving grace. That it's the division is not as stiff competition as was originally feared.
But you know, I don't know if you noticed the delusion that was there, because I'm talking about the World Series. And you're like, no, don't worry, Mets fan, you're fine. You might get into the playoffs. And I'm like, no, wait a minute here. I'm talking World Series. I'm worried we're not going to win the World Series because of our catastrophic defense. And you're like, you'll get in the playoffs. I should be happy with the playoffs. You're right. I should be delighted that you feel like we have a really good shot at the playoffs. Instead, I'm like, yeah, but how are we going to fix Tom Smith in left field? Like what? Like, it's really been catastrophic watching some of the like lines that our outfielders take to fly balls. Let's just put it that way. It's like West Campus quad on a Saturday night. Let's put it that way. There's a Duke joke for you that I hope is still true. Yeah, it's not pretty.
Well, it keeps it interesting, I guess.
Yes. Well, that's our gift for sure.
All right, let's go into some of these questions from the chat, and thank you all for submitting those. We have from Alex G. What type of reaction to the book have you received from the Mets, if any?
Ron Darling really likes it. Gary Cohen, who is my favorite Met now, maybe in a weird way, shouted it out on air. That was one of the most surreal and delightful moments of my life, my natural life. But other than that, I don't really know. I did send it to Andy, and he was very happy to be. The book is actually dedicated to Andy Chavez, our reserve outfielder who made the greatest catch I've ever witnessed in my life. I mean, it's also dedicated to my family, blah, 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 blah. But, also Andy Chavez. He seemed happy. I don't think Keith Hernandez probably forgot who I was 3 seconds after I left the stadium. But the front office or the team itself, I don't know that I'll ever know, right? Because the book is called So Many Ways to Lose. They're not going to officially back it. But like individually, as you probably know, people within the Mets organization, like, they're not delusional, like they know. So, there are people in the organization, I would imagine, who are enjoying it, but would not say so. There was also someone who, through a friend of a friend, rather randomly, who was a Mets executive, who had just the right sense of humor for the book, who I had gotten it into his hands. And he was one of the people cited in the Athletic stories. So I don't know. So I'm not following. I don't think I'm going to follow that up. So the long answer to your question is I have no idea.
Okay. From Jim, we have thanks for spending time with us. What was your lowest point as a Mets fan? And he lists a couple options, and one of them is that loss to the Royals in 2015.
No. 2015, first of all, I was so delighted that we were there, number one. And number two, I knew within 3 innings of game 1 that we were going to lose. Like, it was completely obvious that the Royals were a better baseball team in every shape and form. Like, they were just like, it was impossible to strike them out. They caught every single ball. They took every single extra base. You know this because you wrote the story to grind it in my eye today. No, it was 2006. It was game 7 of the NLCS. That was the most gutting. One thing I didn't anticipate in writing this book was how often when I was promoting it that I would have to relive it. I should have thought of that in advance, but that was, for those who may not know what I'm talking about, the Mets came within 2 runs or 1 base hit really of going to the World Series in 2006 with a team that I still think was the most talented team that we've had, maybe even including the 86 team, and probably would have won the World Series. And that came after the greatest postseason catch I've ever seen in person. I was at that game. I was at Shea Stadium. I was in the upper deck all the way in nosebleeds, and the stadium shook when Endy Chavez made this famous catch where he robbed Scott Rowland of a home run and then doubled off the runner who was so shocked that he had caught it. He basically had run to third base. That was Jim Edmonds. And I was there for it, and the stadium was shaking, bouncing the way the upper deck at Shea Stadium used to bounce. And I really thought it might collapse. Like, it was crazy. I'd never felt anything like that. And I thought, this is good. I'll go lie out. Like, this is a good way to go. I'm okay with this. And now, in retrospect, I kind of wish I had gone that way because of what happened like an hour later, right? Carlos Beltran watches our best postseason hitter, like literally signed because of his postseason excellence. Like, for the Houston Astros 2 years earlier, he'd almost single-handedly won the World Series for them without cheating, by the way, because there were no iPhones then. And that's why we signed him. And he had a torrid NLCS against the Cardinals too. Like, if he had come up with a base hit, he would have been the NLCS MVP, no question. He did not. And so that sort of reversal of fortune, right? That's very Metsy. That's why, like, a lot of teams have amazing highs and a lot of teams have crushing lows. One characteristic feature about the Mets is we try to separate them by as little time as possible, right? So we try to get them really, really, really close together. And that's a special thing. So that's probably it. Was the Kenny Rogers walk-off walk one of the options that guy gave us, or was it just like, what were the options?
Another one was Madoff's impact on the Willpons payroll. The more big picture type of case. more
of a macro thing, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, and we actually had the next question was related to that. This one is from Gary F. Asking, did your research uncover any insight into the Willpons' knowledge of Madoff's scan? And what conclusions did you draw about the Willpons generally from your research?
No is the short answer. And this is sort of an embarrassing confession for a journalist to make, especially with Amrith, an employee of the Wall Street Journal on the call here. I have no ability to do financial journalism of any. I can't understand finance on the most basic level. So that's a long way of saying I just wasn't going to go into that chapter trying to sort of dig the dirt up. It also wasn't really the point of the chapter. Like, it was more about the ethos, the personality, the scenario, the circumstances, the comedy of it. But like, to the extent that there was an angle on it, I think, when you're following it as news headlines, you can sort of lose the personalities involved in it. And you can sort of look at the Willpons as these rich schemers who were, conniving with the money guy and coming up with this crazy system to elude the law, blah, 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 blah. But if you talk to a Mets fan, you'd be like, they were not in on it. There's no way. They got duped. It's the Willpons. And so that was sort of one of the things that I wanted to write about, was just, the book is called So Many Ways to Lose because every chapter is effectively about a way to lose. Like that's the core structure of the book. And boy is getting, losing basically 3 or 4 seasons because you got cleaned out in a Ponzi scheme, a unique way to lose, right? So that's really fundamentally what that chapter was about. And, I also think that like time has sort of vindicated the were they broke, were they complicit thing, right? Well, no, they were able, obviously they were not completely broke because they still owned the team for, until a year ago, right? So I guess they could afford to hold on to the team. And it does not appear in any way, shape, or form that they were complicit. They seem to have gotten screwed as badly as everyone else. And I think to the one thing that I didn't learn this, I knew this, but sort of got much deeper into the story was if there is one thing I can pity Jeff Willpons for, it is the Madoff saga, because the degree to which Willpons and Fred Willpons and Bernie Madoff were not really friends. They were like business friends, you know what I mean? Not actual friends. Madoff's son and Jeff Willpons were like BFFs, like they were serious, close friends. And Jeff is the one who introduced his father to Bernie because of his friendship with Bernie's son. His son was an innocent victim of this, and Jeff lost his dear friend to suicide and set his dad up for financial catastrophe, right? So he's a putz, but even putzes, we should have empathy for putzes sometimes.
Going from awful, depressing ways to lose to winning, we had a question from Sue A, who noted that you don't look old enough to have lived through the '69 Mets.
Thank you, but true, yes.
Do you think your fatalism about them is influenced by that? I asked this as a 63-year-old who lived through it.
One thing I discovered in sort of writing this book is that the Mets identity is sort of like this tension between the 62, original Mets, 40 and 120, the worst baseball team of all time, Casey Stengel. That's where the DNA of the comedy and the self-effacement and the fatalism and the having fun and not expecting to win, that's where that all comes from. And then the other side of the coin is 69, right? It's not, people sometimes associate us just with the 62, just with the losing, but the 69 is the other part of the coin, and it's just as important to who we are, right? In addition to being 40 and 120 and the worst team of all time, we are also the team that became the world champions out of nowhere, from there to world champion in 7 years. That is every bit as much as the Mets identity as the losing. And if you watch the Mets history, it's amazing how often it repeats itself. Like as soon as we bottom out, you can almost set your clock by us going to the World Series in 6 years. It's crazy. Like, and so that tension is very much a part of being a Mets fan, because that 69 Miracle Mets season is why I always think, why Mets fans always think, and then it's reinforced by 86 when it happened the same way. That's why we always think we're going to win in the end, because it has this weird way of happening when we least expect it. This is a blessing and a curse, right? Because most of the time it doesn't happen, right? That's why I say it takes about 6 years, right?
I think we might be wrapping up here, but one more maybe, Chrissy? Okay. This one is from Justin D, who says, one of the things that I loved most about the book was learning about how Tom Seaver and Mike Piazza, in very different times and in different ways, fought and clawed their way to the heights they reached. Can you talk about that and what lessons someone might learn from the book, even if, like me, they aren't Mets fans or even big baseball fans?
Yeah, I mean, these guys were hard workers, really, really, really hard workers. And, Piazza gets criticized a lot as, someone who was born on third base and thought he hit a triple, which in some respects is true. But in order to make the major leagues, the last 90 feet is the hard part. And he built himself from, a very borderline prospect who was really limited as a baseball player and didn't have a position, to not just a slugger, but, you know, belying a lot of the steroid stuff is the fact that he hit like 360. I mean, like, it was incredible. Like, he had batting averages that just like boggle the mind, that are not explained by performance enhancing drugs. And also the management of a pitching staff that's an underrated part of his career. And Seaver is just one of the more methodical, almost scientific, analytic students of the game. Just cut no corners ever. And, you know, is sort of like a practitioner before its time of that that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 or whatever it is. He was that guy, right? Like, he did everything a billion times. He had that rare ability to like study everything with perfect detail and understanding, and then in the moment just be totally natural, right? Which is something that almost none of us can do, right? So I guess they're a testament to, they had talent. Obviously, they were both incredibly gifted athletes, but they made themselves almost through conscious chiseling into the professional athletes that they became. So it's sort of like they I guess I'd say they sort of teach you that the building of the craft is the difference maker, and that they spared no thought or time or effort in that. Thanks, Justin. That's my old friend, Justin. Chronicle 96. Thank you.
All right, Chrissy, I don't know if you want to wrap up anything here, but thank you so much for your time, Devin. This was great.
Thank you.
Happy to see everyone here and participating in the chat. And yeah, this was lovely. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you all for coming out. It's great to see so many